My name is Boye Adegoke, and I work as Senior Program Manager at Paradigm Initiative. Paradigm Initiative is a social enterprise that works to connect young people in Africa to digital opportunities, and also work to safeguard the internet freedom or digital rights of everyone, especially in Africa. The state of internet freedom in Africa, it's at an interesting place right now because there has been a trend of kind of attack on internet freedom on the continent for some years now. We have seen shutdown happen in several places, from Ethiopia to Cameroon, to Uganda, to Tanzania, to Gambia, and the most recent is the restriction of Twitter in Nigeria. So when you look at all these indices, it shows clearly that internet freedom is not in a good place on the continent. And I'm going to give specific examples in addition to the suspension of Twitter in Nigeria, which I think is the hottest news now. In Uganda, there has been, for almost 3 years now, there have been back and forth about the introduction of social media taxes and regulation of OTT services. And these conversations have been on because the government has insisted on going on with these policies, despite the fact that stakeholders were against the policies. And despite the fact that stakeholders have presented sound argument on why those policies were bad. But it appears that the governance of the internet space it's been hijacked by political authority in these respective countries against the multi-stakeholder model of the United Nations, the internet governance multi-stakeholder model. It appears that the political authority are exerting their authority and closing the civic space online, by ensuring that it has the same level of control it had over legacy media, for example. And when I say the same level of control that it had over legacy media, for example, legacy media would typically be regulated, would be licensed, and government can decide one morning to say, you know what, go and close that radio station. Go and close that, television station, or withdraw the license of this radio station, or fine this radio station. So that is what the pattern has been in Africa too. It appears that the government is hell-bent on, ensuring that it can rein in, digital platform in the same way, and that's why it has introduced OTT regulation. And Nigeria is beginning to learn from Uganda as well. In fact, Nigeria is taking lessons from Uganda, because as we speak, Nigeria is trying to regulate OTT services too, and trying to prevent the free access that people have had to the internet, the openness of the internet space, the diversity that it offers, the plurality of views and opinion that it offers. The government is attacking it vigorously and trying to create an internet that is deprived of those elements, those important elements that makes an internet open, free, and all of that. Yeah, so the first recommendation is that the African government needs to stop their Stone Age approach to regulating the online space, or if you like, the digital space. I think it is unhelpful that the government on this continent are not engaging enough. And when I say engage, in terms of listening to the voices of experts, and also very importantly, to also engage in every global processes where issues of maybe content moderation, digitalization, internet freedoms are being, discussed, because it is lack of this engagement that is leading to some of this policy, of these bad policies that we are seeing. Our government seems to be convincing itself that it can, have the same approach that it had to traditional media, to social media, or to digital space generally. It is unhelpful. And I think there is a lot that we can achieve if we decide to talk more to one another, but most importantly, to adopt the internet governance model that has been, put in place by the United Nations. I think the internet is a unique space, and that is why the governance model is about multi-stakeholderism. It's about everybody having a say in what needs to be done. But the way African governments are going about it, African governments are just making decisions all by themselves, irrespective of what other stakeholders think, and irrespective of the damage it does to digital inclusion, damage it does even to their own economy. I think that for the sake of progress, for the sake of leveraging and benefiting from the gains of digital innovation, we need to do better with regulations in terms of going through rigorous processes and learning from best examples around the world, listening to the voices of experts, and not make decisions just for political gains and political interest. And most importantly, do better in terms of creating conducive regulatory framework that would even allow us in Africa to hold the big tech more accountable, because I also think that we should not just put all the blame on the government alone. We should also talk about in terms of responsibility for the big techs as well. But I think we are not in a good place to hold the big tech accountable, because our system, our framework are not really where they should be. We have some unnecessary laws. We have some regulations that have been introduced, some policies that have been introduced that does not give us the opportunity to have a level playing field with the rest of the world. Like the EU, for example. For example, the EU has the GDPR, which applies, throughout Europe. In Africa, many countries still lack a data protection law. Barely, half of the continent has either a data protection or even a draft bill. It's not a good place to be as a continent. We need to fix all those gaps so that we can also be an equal player within the digital space, and so that we can leverage the opportunity for Africa's benefits.
My name is Laura Vidal, and I am working with the Insights team at Mozilla as their outreach coordinator. Mozilla engages a lot in trying to make the internet healthier, and they're working with different groups and different organizations, not only on research, but also on advocacy and supporting groups and people to make a better, healthier internet. We had a special feature with over 100 experts in the Internet Health Report. And so we collected stories from all over the world, both healthy and unhealthy. And we had many, many stories from Africa. And there are many trends that are really interesting coming from the continent. But I think it's also important to underline that these trends also echo events and phenomena that are happening in other parts of the world as well. So the stories that the African activists shared with us, they really resonate with the opportunities and the challenges that are taking place in other parts of the world. And so I will say that there were of course many stories, but 3 trends were really, really important. One of them were shutdowns, whether that was in Ethiopia after Hakalu Hundesa's death, or during the elections in Burundi. Then there were also some other cases like in Sudan and Algeria, where the government just pulled the plug during the final exams to avoid students from cheating. So you see like this tendency of responding with shutdowns to keep control, but risking really important, really deep economic and social consequences. Another trend was misinformation. And in some cases, like in Ethiopia, for example, they were really connected with the shutdowns because journalists could not fact check appropriately. And then there was a question of access, whether it was internet penetration or the creation of solutions to make students continue school during COVID-19 or in general. Access was a big, big question, both in positive and negative ways, by the way. I think there's a lot of hope. And I think that that's also something that the Internet Health Report really wants to put forward. The problems that we're having are really particular, but I think it's really important to see how we share so many. The fact that we can compare issues, that we can gather and share experiences that look alike. The fact that governments and people trying to cut communications, they also share notes, they also share experiences. You can see that when one government does something, another government might be copying it somehow in another place. So I think it's hugely important that we keep connected beyond borders, beyond languages, beyond cultures, to understand what is going on, because I do believe that this is an effort that is it's borderless, it's multicultural, it's happening horizontally, Oh, and it should be seen in a very, I would say, not only multicultural, but also decolonial way, trying to think of new structures. And one thing that gives me a lot of hope is that you can see a lot of builders and a lot of activists and civil society actors believing really deeply in these principles and the principle of solidarity. You can see a lot of groups and a lot of people learning from one experience, sharing it with other people. I've been in groups of people learning, how the difficulties around information about Palestine is happening, sharing tips on how to find information or inform about what's going on in Colombia. So there are many links that are possible, and I'm really hopeful on the fact that we are understanding little by little that this is an international struggle, and it needs to happen through links of solidarity and openness and intercultural openness, if that makes sense.
Hi, my name is Juliet Nampuka. I work with the Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa, otherwise known as CIPESA, where we do quite a bit of research into the trends shaping and informing ICT policy across the continent and sometimes beyond. Our work was disrupted by the shutdown. In many ways, we focus on all things online, but now here we were locked out of online spaces. So there was a bit of a slowdown. While we could work on issues that we had on our immediate devices, we could not share it unless it was a very extended SMS that you're sending to someone, because at least we still had the facility of sending SMSs. But it really caused a slowdown, and that slowdown is felt across different facets of society. It's felt in business, it's felt in education, it's felt by the health system, it's felt by a cross-section of society. Yes, so for almost 5 days we were offline with pretty much work coming to a standstill. But a lot of catching up had to be done when we eventually regained access to the internet. But nonetheless, these decisions carry very heavy costs for citizens and the state alike. So it's felt at a micro level, it's felt at a macro level, and it's unfortunate that we still find ourselves in situations like this in this day and age. We find ourselves at such an interesting time when it comes to arguments around digital access, internet access, freedom of expression online, content regulation. There's so much, and it really is bringing to life this whole idea of a web of the internet. There are many arguments pro certain measures, many arguments against certain measures. For example, issues around content regulation. Who should have a bigger say on some of those arguments? Should it be platforms? Should it be states? In Africa, we've seen states come out and more aggressively take a stance when it comes to content moderation. We've been seeing arrests. We've been seeing censorship. Self-censorship is also being fueled by some of the state actions. So there is a narrative being built around what content moderation should look like in some African countries. Whereas in other places, it seems to be a debate that is squarely almost on the hands of platforms, more so than it is on states. So very many dynamics happening. Of course, a lot of these issues come back in the contexts of the different countries, of the different scenarios that call or do not call for content to be taken down or to be moderated. But nonetheless, we need to be having many more vibrant debates and arguments and reach more sensible conclusions on where some of these issues should go. But also we need to still bring in the many millions of Africans who are yet to come online. And that's amidst so much else that is going on in the continent. But we cannot refute the fact that having access to digital channels of communication does give one a leg up in the world that we are living in and in the world that we are moving into.
Hi, my name is Sigi Waigumo Mwanzia. I am a digital program officer at Article 19 Eastern Africa. Article 19 Eastern Africa is a non-governmental organization which works on freedom of expression and access to information. We focus on various thematic issues, with digital rights being one of our rallying calls at Article 19. So various countries in Eastern Africa have held their elections between 2020 and 2021, including Tanzania, Uganda, and more recently Ethiopia. And out of those countries, two countries, including Tanzania and Uganda, have disrupted access to digital platforms, including the internet. Now, to the first question about the impact on the openness of shutdowns on the internet, one of the reasons why we come out very strongly on internet shutdowns is because they are tantamount to a violation of core human rights. Several experts at the UN level, at the African Commission on Human Rights level, amongst other high-level officials, have categorically stated that blanket internet shutdowns, that the generic blocking and the filtering of services is essentially a violation of international human rights law. Well, one of the issues building off of this violation of core human rights is that governments essentially want to restrict the free flow of information online without any care, without any regard about the consequences of these shutdowns on people's rights, on their economies, on reputations across the world. The second impact of shutdowns on the openness of the internet is the recognition that the internet in this day and age is synonymous with freedom of choice. Now, internet disruptions shatter this notion that the internet is a free, it is a secure, it is an open platform that can and should be accessed by anyone, irrespective of your gender, of your political affiliations, of your political opinions, irrespective of your age. And so internet shutdowns disrupt this notion that the internet is a free platform, is a secure and open platform. The third impact, building off of this, the second impact, is that disruptions and shutdowns block people from accessing core information, not just during the election period, but also during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, where we have witnessed and seen the resource that the internet, the resources that individuals are able to access on the internet. One of the other impacts building off of this restriction of key information, especially during political campaigning, during the electoral period, is that shutdowns essentially disrupt political debate. They disrupt societal development. Speaking to the question about why it is easier for governments to disrupt access, so two responses to that question. There is increasingly a recognition that internet access, not just in Kenya, but also across the African region, the Eastern Africa region, is enabled by telecommunications operators, by internet service providers, and in certain countries such as Ethiopia, by mobile network operators who are essentially state entities. Now, the licensing environment in a lot of Eastern African countries, where these private companies apply to governments for licenses to be able to deploy their services, has enabled governments to be able to issue orders to these private entities to either immediately shut down the internet or to disrupt access to telecommunications services, lest they risk having their licenses revoked. We have also noticed and observed that several governments have the capacity to kill, quote unquote, access to the internet and to disrupt access through kill switch systems. Now, in countries such as Kenya, in the run-up to the general election in 2017, the Communications Authority of Kenya representative stated that they would shut down the internet to prevent violence as a worst case scenario, which demonstrates that governments possess the capabilities, even outside of this relationship between governments and private entities, to disrupt access to the internet. My final comments is to reiterate, as several, as is set out under international law, is to reiterate that the rights that people have offline are also applicable online. Several commentators, including the recent special rapporteur on freedom of expression and access to information in Africa, came out quite clearly in the revised declaration and stated that states should not interfere with individuals and communities access to the internet. As I mentioned earlier, the internet is a platform. It should be an open and a free platform for individuals to be able not just to access information, but also to share information, to share ideas, to share opinions about political affairs. And so my one final closing remark is keep the internet open. It is a useful resource that should not be arbitrarily restricted. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Johannes Ayaleo. I'm a PhD candidate at the Faculty of Law, Monash University in Australia. Basically, social media has brought both positive as well as negative impacts in Ethiopia, especially in terms of giving alternative voices for muted political groups, as well as, it enables individuals to mobilize and, to express their dissenting views. On the other hand, it also brought negative consequences on marginalized societies as well as minorities by amplifying hate speech through using various coded terms and dog whistle terms. For example, in the wake of the killing of famous singer Hachalu Hundessa last year, social media amplified hate speech, and the hate circulated on the social media successfully abated crime against humanity in that region. So social media needs to do more in order to moderate illegal content such as hate speech. Well, basically, in terms of regulation, so far the government has been doing, to affirmatively use the internet as well as to regulate it. Recently, the government introduced a piece of legislation on hate speech as well as fake news. Especially last year, the government enacted the hate speech and disinformation suppression and prevention proclamation, and that law prohibits, dissemination or circulation of hate speech on the social media. And whenever an individual or a group engages in hate speech or using social media, there is a punishment that's mentioned in the proclamation. That punishment may entail civil liability as well as criminal sanction. So there are fines as well as criminal punishment for that. So the government's effort in one way is understandable, but at the same time, there are problematic provisions in that proclamation. There are vaguely formulated terms. For example, the law defines hate speech as any speech that promotes hatred on basis of protected status such as disability, ethnic group, religion, or other groups, and that speech may stir up, violence or discrimination or attack. But while defining discrimination and attack, the proclamation fails to define what amounts to hatred. Even during the drafting stage, there were various concerns voiced, but the government set aside such concerns and the law drafted as it is. So especially when it comes to the meaning of hatred, it's quite problematic, and the law fails to draw inspiration from internationally accepted principles to define hatred, such as the Rabat Plan of Action, as well as the Camden Principles on freedom of expression and non-discrimination. So with that, the law may have a chilling effect on freedom of expression. The other concern is when the hate speech was, disseminated with social media, especially with content that have more than 5,000 followers, and it entails kind of hefty fines and, kind of punishment. So in that way as well, the measure is a bit disproportionate compared to the income of, writers on the social media. So these are some of the concerns. The other, if this is maybe taken as a regulation, the government also imposed various dubious and problematic decrees that implement Internet Shutdown. Maybe this is also another acts of the government that aims to regulate the internet. So whenever shutdowns are taken, obviously it debilitates human rights on the digital age, as well as it restricts the flow of information on the internet.